A chill traveled my spine when I saw the black brand in the doorway. A simple spiral carved in the wood, like an eye watching anyone who entered. It was the third abandoned house I found like this, empty, with dishes still on the table and toys scattered on the floor. As if the residents simply had evaporated. My name is Sam Houston, and this story is not contained in Texas's official books. Perhaps because no one would believe it, or perhaps because there are truths that men prefer to bury along with their dead. The year was 1837. I had just become the first president of the Republic of Texas after Mexico's independence. The responsibilities of building a nation weighed on my shoulders, but an urgent call brought me to the small community of Ravens Creek, a few days of travel from our newborn capital. It was not an official appeal. It was a simple letter, handwritten by an old friend, Thomas Blackwood, who had fought beside me in San Jacinto. The lyrics were shaking on the yellowish paper. Something is devouring Ravens Creek inside. People disappear. Children add. And those who swear they hear voices in the forest at night. I don't trust anyone else to investigate this. The sun was starting to put it when I reached the boundaries of the city. Ravens Creek had a prosperous appearance that contrasted with neighboring settlements. The houses were well built, the abundant plantations, the fat cattle. It seemed impossible for a tragedy to dwell such a blessed place. President Houston. Thomas ran to meet me when I dismantled in front of the city's small pension. The years had not been kind. His face was wrinkled and I remembered, and a new scar cut his left cheek. Please, without titles here, old friend, I said, squeezing his hand. Tell me what is happening. Thomas looked around nervously and lowered his voice. Not here. Walls have ears. He took me to the back of the pension, where a simple room was already prepared. Only when the door was closed and a lamp was lit, did he seem to relax a little. It started about 6 months ago, he explained, sitting heavily in a wooden chair. The city has always been a common place, with the normal difficulties of the border. But then something changed. Suddenly the crops doubled in size. The herd multiplied. Gold was found in the stream. A prosperity that seemed unnatural. I raised an eyebrow, skeptical. And is that a problem? Prosperity came at a price, Sam. People started to change. First, it was an entire family that disappeared at night. The Miller, husband, wife, and 3 children. No one saw it much. They said they had left west, although they left all their things behind. Thomas swallowed before continuing. Then it was the youngest daughter of the Coleman. I was only 8 years old. The body was found in the stream 3 days later, marked with symbols I never saw before. Local authorities said it was an accident, that she simply drowned. But I saw the brands, Sam. No accident would do that. He opened a drawer and withdrew a piece of paper with a rough design, a spiral surrounded by symbols that looked like distorted lyrics from some language I didn't recognize. I found it at the church door before it was closed. Reverend Jenkins disappeared shortly after. How many people have disappeared so far? 17 in 6 months. All without explanation. And the strangest, Thomas hesitated. Most residents don't seem to care. As if a silent agreement had been made. Prosperity in exchange for sacrifices? I added, feeling a knot in the stomach. Precisely. And no one questions why everyone is enriching. All except those who disappear. I looked out the window. The sun had put it completely and the streets were deserted. Not even the dogs barked. Who is in charge here? I asked. Officially, Mayor Holloway. But the true power is with Judge Thaddeus Colton. It arrived just over a year ago. He got the richest property of the county in a card game. People say he never loses. The light bulb shared, throwing ghostly shadows on the walls. The judge conducts private meetings in his mansion every week. The most influential men in the city participate. My invitation never arrived. Thomas laughed without humor. Probably because I asked a lot of questions. And what do you think happens in these meetings? My old friend's eyes found mine, full of a fear I never saw even on the battlefields. I think they make agreements with something they shouldn't. Something old and hungry, not only satisfied with cattle and harvests. Something that requires blood. The next morning I presented myself as a government inspector, in charge of evaluating the conditions of the border settlements. I did not mention my real name or position. I wanted to observe without alerting anyone about my true identity. Ravens Creek was even more impressive in daylight. The buildings were solid and well loose, the clean streets, the full barns. Through the windows of the houses, I could see furniture that would be worthy of mansions in New Orleans. "Good morning, sir. What brings you to our small community?" The voice was severe and controlled, coming from a tall, thin man wearing a flawless suit and a high cup hat. His eyes, however, had the coldness of a snake. "Judge Colton, I assume?" I said, extending my hand. "Jonathan Adams, sent by the government to inspect the settlements of this region." He squeezed my hand briefly. His touch was cold as a marble. "An official visit?" "We were not notified. The best inspections are those that do not give time for preparation, don't you agree?" A thin and humorous smile crossed his face. "Naturally. Ravens Creek has nothing to hide. In fact, we are the example of prosperity that every border should follow. That's what I came to check. What would be the secret of your success, Judge Colton?" His eyes studied me for a moment too long. "Discipline. Hard work. And faith. The right kind of faith." We spent the morning running through the city. The school had more books than many libraries from larger cities. The warehouse was full of products that would normally be found only in important ports. Even the police station, a simple wooden building, had new and shining weapons. "How do you deal with crime here?" I asked the sheriff, a corpulent man with small, suspicious eyes. "We don't have much of it," he said dryly. "People know how to behave." "I heard that there was disappearances recently." The sheriff exchanged a quick look with the judge before answering. "People come and go to the border, Mr. Adams. Some cannot stand the hard life and leave without saying goodbye. Others go west, seeking gold in California." "Including children?" I pressed, thinking about Girl Coleman. A heavy silence fell between us. It was the judge who broke it. "Tragedies happen, Mr. Adams. Coleman's daughter was a pitiful accident. As for the other children, you may have heard about it. They left with their families." "I understand." "And the church?" "I noticed it is closed." "Reverend Jenkins received a call to serve somewhere," the judge said with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "We're looking for a substitute, but in the meantime, I have driven small religious services myself to those who want." Before I could ask more questions, the judge consulted his pocket watch. "Forgive me, Mr. Adams, but I have commitments to fulfill. Feel free to continue your inspection. And if you don't have other plans, I would like to invite you to dinner at my residence tonight. It will be an opportunity to meet other prominent citizens of our community." I accepted the invitation, knowing it was exactly what I needed. A chance to observe the men that Thomas suspected were involved in whatever was happening in Ravens Creek. At dusk, I returned to the room at the pension to prepare for dinner. Thomas was waiting for me, anxious. "Were you invited to the mansion?" he asked incredulously. "This is unusual. The judge rarely opens the door to outsiders. Maybe he's trying to impress me. Or watch me closely. Or both," Thomas murmured. "Be careful, Sam. The walls of that house have secrets." While we dressed, Thomas handed me a small object wrapped in leather. "My grandmother was Cherokee. She gave me this when I was a boy. He said that he removes evil spirits." I unwrapped the package to find an amulet made of bird-shaped carved bone. "I'm not a superstitious man, Thomas. Not even me, until you come to this city. Just take it with you." I put the amulet in my vest pocket, more to please my old friend than for believing in your protection. The Colton mansion was at the top of a small hill, dominating the landscape. It was an imposing two-story construction with white columns and high windows. It would seem appropriate in some southern city like Charleston or Savannah, not on the Texan border. I was greeted by a severe-looking butler that led me to a dining room where about 12 men were already gathered. Judge Colton was at the head of the table, and by his right side was an empty chair, apparently reserved for me. "Ah, Mr. Adams. Welcome to my humble residence," said the judge, getting up. "Allow me to introduce you to our illustrious citizens." One by one, he introduced the men present: the city doctor, the banker, the warehouse owner, the most prosperous cattle breeder, and other land traders and landowners. The sheriff was there too, watching me with suspicion. Dinner was served by silent servants who seemed to move like shadows. The food was extravagant to the border standards: roasted turkey, glacéd ham, imported potatoes, French wines. An abundance that contrasted with the typical scarcity of Western settlements. The conversation flowed on safe topics: the promising harvest climate, cattle prices on the market, plans to expand trade with other regions. But I realized a pattern: none of them mentioned the missing families or questioned the abnormal prosperity they enjoyed. "I must say, gentlemen," I commented when there was a break, "that Ravens Creek is notably prosperous for such a young and isolated community. What would be the secret?" A momentary silence fell on the table. The men exchanged quick looks. "There is no secret, Mr. Adams," the banker replied after a moment. "Just hard work and mutual cooperation." "We are blessed," added the doctor, a man with small glasses and gray beard. "The soil is fertile, the favorable climate. And we keep the unwanted elements away," the sheriff added, fixing me with a penetrating look. "Undesirable elements? Lazy? Drunk? Questioners," he smiled without humor. "People who do not adapt to our way of life." "And this way of life includes the disappearance of whole families?" I asked, setting aside the subtleties. The judge slowly landed his fork. "I see you heard some unfounded rumors, Mr. Adams." "Understandable, considering its sources." "And what would my sources be, in your opinion?" "Thomas Blackwood is a disturbed man," said the judge, his now hard tone as steel. "He lost his wife 2 years ago and never recovered properly. See conspiracies where there are only coincidences. Coincidences like 17 missing people in 6 months? The men around the table shifted uncomfortably. Only the judge kept his composure, looking at me with renewed interest. "You seem well informed to someone who arrived only yesterday. Perhaps it is not really a government inspector." I decided that there was no longer sense to keep the scam. "My name is Sam Houston. I was president of this republic until recently and still have considerable influence on the government. I came to investigate the disturbing accounts in this community." A murmur toured the table. Some seemed surprised, others worried. The judge, however, just smiled. "It's an honor to receive you, Mr. Houston. His reputation precedes him. But I am afraid that it has been based on erroneous information." "So correct myself," I challenged. "Explain how such a small and isolated city gets such prosperity as their citizens disappear without explanation." The judge got up, resting his hands on the table. "Gentlemen, I ask you to leave us. I believe Mr. Houston and I need a private conversation." The men withdrew in silence, some throwing glances of concern toward me. When we were alone, the judge headed for a carved wooden cabinet and served 2 glasses of dark amber liquid. "Tennessee whiskey," he said, offering me a glass. "Your favorite drink if I'm not mistaken." I accepted the glass, but didn't drink. The judge raised his in a silent toast and took a long sip. "The Lord is a pragmatic man, Mr. Houston. Built a nation out of nowhere. You know what is needed to create something lasting. Justice and law. No disappearances and secrets." He gave a short and joyful laugh. "Justice and law are luxuries for established nations. On the border, survival comes first. And beyond survival, prosperity." The judge walked to the window, looking at the darkness outside. When I arrived at Raven's Creek, it was just another miserable settlement about to be swept from the map. Drought, diseases, indigenous attacks, bandits. The settlers were considering abandoning everything. He turned to me, his eyes shining disturbingly in the candlelight. That's when I discovered something buried in the hills west of the city. Something old. Something powerful. The natives knew, of course. They kept distance. But I didn't fear the unknown. A shiver traveled my spine as the judge continued his narrative, his voice now almost hypnotic. I made a deal. Prosperity for the city in exchange for periodic offerings. A small price to pay for the larger good. Human offerings, I said, feeling my stomach to turn. You're talking about human sacrifices. Such a dramatic word, the judge made a clear gesture. I prefer to think like a contract. Some need to leave so that many can thrive. And who decides who leaves? A cold smile crossed his face. Those who question too much. Those who see what they should not. Those who do not contribute properly to our community. This is murder, he said, placing his untouched glass on the table and getting up. And you will be judged for that. The judge remained impassive. Who? The Lord is alone here, Houston. Without army. Without real authority. Only a former president with fantastic stories about pacts and sacrifices. Who would believe? He approached, his now low and threatening voice. Besides, I fear that the Lord did not understand the situation completely. It was not an invitation to dinner that you received today. It was a selection. At that moment, I realized that the room had darkened. The candles fluttered as if an air chain had entered the environment, although the windows were closed. And there was a distant sound, like a whisper in a language I didn't know. My hand moved instinctively to the hidden gun under my coat, but before it could reach it, the dining room door opened. The men who had retired returned, now wearing black cloaks with the embroidered spiral symbol in the chest. The contract requires new blood tonight, said the judge, now speaking like a priest before his congregation. And what blood more valuable than a hero of the Republic? What happened next is something I try to forget, even though I know that memories will never completely abandon me. They advanced toward me, not as civilized men, but as predators. I knocked down two before they could reach me, but there were many. I felt hands holding myself, dragging me out of the room, through the hallway through a hidden door under a tapestry. A spiral staircase came down to the depths of the earth, illuminated by torches that produced a greenish and sickly light. The smell of mold and something metallic and ancient, intensified with each step. At the bottom there was a circular chamber, dug directly on the rock. The walls were covered by symbols similar to those Thomas had shown me, but in greater quantity and complexity. In the center, a dark stone table, surrounded by 13 blackwood posts. This place existed long before any of us, the judge explained while I was tied to one of the posts. The natives knew him, but they feared their power. I found him. I awakened him. And he rewarded us. What kind of man makes a pact with evil? I asked, still fighting the strings. The judge smiled, but this time there was something different on his face. Inhuman quality, as if something else looked through his eyes. It's not about good and bad, Houston. It is about power. About survival. About progress. He approached, holding an ornate dagger. When your blood touches the stone, you will understand. You'll see how I see. And then it will become part of the pact. Part of something bigger. But before it could continue, a riot broke out at the entrance of the chamber. Screams, shots, the sound of fighting. The men of cloak turned, alarmed. The judge growled an incomprehensible order. Thomas appeared at the top of the stairs, accompanied by 4 other armed men, relatives of some of the missing, as I found later. He had followed my steps to the mansion and, realizing that I didn't return, had quickly gathered a group to help me. The followed chaos was brutal and confused. Shots echoed in the underground chamber. Men fell. The judge, seeing his ritual interrupted, advanced toward me with the raised dagger, but Thomas was faster. A certain shot hit him in his chest. But the judge did not fall. Staggered, looked at the wound with surprise and then laughed. A laugh that did not belong to a human being. "You can't kill me," he said, your voice now a grotesque mixture, as if several voices spoke simultaneously. "I'm not just Thaddeus Colton. I am the guardian of the pact. The promise-bearer." As he spoke, his body began to squirm, the skin stretching and tearing at some points, revealing not flesh and blood, but something dark and viscous. It was at this moment that I remembered the amulet. With his hands still tied, I was able to reach the pocket of the vest and remove the small carved bird figure. "The entity you serve has power only because you allowed it," I shouted, raising the amulet as much as my ties allowed it. "You open the door, and it can be closed." The judge, or whatever he was using as shape, hesitated for a moment. His now completely black eyes fired on the amulet. "A primitive symbol cannot stop what was awake," he said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. Thomas, taking advantage of the distraction, managed to cut my strings. I immediately advanced against the judge, pressing the amulet against his deformed chest. An inhuman scream erupted from his throat. It was not pain, I realized, but anger. Frustration. As if something he considered guaranteed were being denied. "The pact demands blood," the creature growled. "If not yours, then another offering should be done." At that moment, the judge, or what was left of him, launched himself against the stone table in the center of the chamber. Before we could stop him, he dug his own dagger into his chest, falling over the stained surface. Its blood flowed, not red, but dark as oil, spreading in patterns that followed the carvings on the stone. A tremor shook the whole chamber. Dust and stones began to fall from the ceiling. "We have to get out of here," shouted Thomas, pulling me by the arm. As we ran to the stairs, I saw by the corner of the eye the judge's body sinking on the stone table, as if the solid surface had become liquid. And before the darkness consumed him completely, he would swear that I saw his face one last time, not into an expression of pain, but of triumph. Ravens Creek was never the same. In the following weeks, I sent official investigators to document the crimes committed under the leadership of Judge Colton. Bodies were found, buried around the property. Evidence of macabre rituals, records of who had been selected and why. The mansion was demolished. The underground chamber, sealed with concrete and stones. But some residents swore that at certain nights they could still hear whispers from nowhere, promises of wealth and prosperity blown by the wind. Most of those involved in the service were tried and convicted. Some claimed to have been coerced by the judge, others admitted to participating voluntarily, seduced by the promise of wealth and power. But everyone agreed at one point, Judge Colton was not entirely human, at least not in the end. As for the exact nature of what we found in that place, what the judge woke or invited to Ravens Creek, I prefer not to speculate. There are strengths in this world that exist on the banks of human understanding. Old entities that patiently wait for the shadows, ready to offer gifts with one hand while charging a terrible price with the other. Thomas kept the amulet, although he darkened after the confrontation, as if he had absorbed something that night. He left Ravens Creek soon after, unable to continue living in a place marked by so much darkness. As for me, I returned to my obligations with the Republic, but something had changed. I carried with me the certainty that the real battle is not only against external enemies, but against the darkness that can grow within any community or within any man. Ravens Creek eventually recovered, becoming a modest settlement, without the unnatural richness of Judge Colton's times, but also without the mysterious disappearances. Spiral marks were erased from doors and windows, the church reopened, and slowly the city began to heal its wounds. But in my trips at Texas in the following years, I was always careful to observe the settlements that thrived too fast, which seemed blessed beyond the reasonable. Because I learned the hardest way that abundance, when it comes too easy, often charges a hidden price. And sometimes, in the stillness of the night, I still think of the look of triumph on the judge's face as his body sank into the stone. As if, even in defeat, he had gotten something he wanted. As if the pack had only changed shape, not finished. Perhaps it is just the imagination of an old soldier, disturbed by memories he would rather forget. Or maybe it's a warning that some doors, once open, never close completely.